a lonely farmer, silent since childhood, faces the threat of losing his home to forces that despise everything he stands for. But just when all seems lost, something unexpected happens. The sun was rising behind the mountains of Virginia, painting the sky with orange hues that spread like brushstrokes across the vast pastures. At Hope Farm, John Baker, known to everyone as Johnny, was already awake. A 50-year-old man, thin, but with muscles defined by hard work, grey hair, and a deep gaze that seemed to reach far beyond the horizon. Since losing his hearing at 8 years old after a high fever, Johnny had developed a heightened perception of the world around him. He couldn't hear sounds, but he felt them as vibrations traveling through his body, especially when walking barefoot on the damp earth in the early morning hours. "Good morning, old man," he murmured to himself, a habit he maintained even without hearing his own voice, while observing the portrait of his grandfather Anthony on the weathered wooden wall. The house was simple, built generations ago, with antique furniture that told silent stories. The walnut table, the rustic benches, the china cabinet, with the few dishes that had belonged to his grandmother. Everything there seemed suspended in time, as if progress had decided to bypass that piece of land. Johnny prepared his coffee in the old iron kettle and ate a piece of cheese he had made himself. Then he went out for his daily routine. First, he checked on the dairy cows, then fed the chickens that scratched freely around the yard. The property wasn't large, but it was enough for him to live with dignity, selling milk, cheese, and some garden produce at the neighboring town's market on Saturdays. That morning he decided to check the property boundaries. He had noticed strange footprints days before and wanted to make sure everything was in order. He walked for almost an hour, appreciating every detail of the landscape he knew like the back of his hand. It was then that he spotted, near the dividing fence, a pile of torn boxes. Intrigued, he approached cautiously. The ground beneath his feet vibrated subtly, and he knew something alive was there. He crouched down and carefully pushed aside the papers, revealing a German shepherd puppy, trembling, thin, and injured. Its eyes, though frightened, had a glimmer of inner strength that deeply touched Johnny's heart. "Who did this to you, little friend?" he asked, knowing there would be no answer, but feeling the need to express his indignation. With gentle gestures, he wrapped the dog in a burlap cloth he carried with him and took it in his arms. The animal, initially tense, relaxed upon feeling human warmth. Perhaps it sensed by instinct that this silent man posed no threat. Back at the house, Johnny prepared a little corner on the porch with clean old rags. He heated water, and with the delicacy of someone treating a child, began cleaning the animal's wounds. He used an herbal ointment he had learned to make from his grandfather, a mixture of rosemary, calendula, and copaiba oil. "You're going to be fine. I'll call you Thor. Seems like you have the strength of a Norse god hidden in there," he said, smiling for the first time in many days. In the days that followed, Johnny dedicated himself entirely to Thor's recovery. He fed him carefully first, with cornmeal porridge, then with small pieces of cooked meat. He observed with satisfaction how the puppy gained strength and confidence, beginning to explore the yard with growing curiosity. A week later, sitting on the porch as the sun set, Johnny noticed something different. Thor, lying at his feet, suddenly raised his head and fixed his gaze on the road leading to the farm. His fur bristled, and a low growl formed in his throat. Johnny couldn't hear it, but he felt the vibration of the animal's tensing body. Following Thor's gaze, he saw a black pickup truck approaching slowly. He didn't recognize the vehicle, which parked near the main gate. A tall man in an impeccable suit and shiny shoes, completely out of place in that rural environment, stepped out of the car. At his side, a younger man carried a folder. Johnny stood up, intrigued. He rarely received visitors, especially people who seemed so out of context there. Thor positioned himself protectively in front of him, as if already understanding his role on this silent farm. The man in the suit opened the gate without asking permission and walked toward the house with determined steps. His face displayed a calculated smile that didn't reach his eyes. When he was just a few yards away, he raised his hand in greeting. "Mr. John Baker?" asked the man in the suit, approaching with confident steps. Johnny observed the stranger's lips moving but couldn't understand what he was saying. Instinctively, he pointed to his own ears and shook his head, indicating his condition. The man seemed momentarily disconcerted, but soon his commercial smile returned to his face. He took a card from his pocket and held it out. With some mistrust, Johnny accepted the card. It read, "Marcus Norton, Executive Director, New Horizon. Developments." Beside him, the young man who accompanied him opened the folder and removed some papers with colorful maps and diagrams. Using exaggerated gestures and pointing to the documents, Marcus tried to communicate. Johnny understood enough to realize it was some kind of business proposal. The visitor repeatedly pointed to the land around them and then to a number written on one of the papers, a considerable amount. Thor remained alert, his eyes fixed on the visitors, a low growl escaping his throat whenever Marcus made more abrupt movements. Johnny stroked the dog's head, calming him, while looking fixedly at the documents. In a firm and decisive gesture, he returned the papers and card to Marcus. He shook his head in refusal and pointed to the exit of the property. He didn't need words to express his refusal. Marcus's smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of contained irritation. He tried to insist, increasing the offer amount with a quick note, but Johnny remained unwavering. After a few tense minutes, the visitors left, but not before Marcus cast a threatening look at the house and land. "They'll be back, Thor," Johnny said to the dog, who was now licking his hand as if understanding every word. "But this place has no price." The next morning, when checking the tractor he used to prepare the land, Johnny discovered that the fuel lines had been cut and important parts were damaged. He immediately thought of the previous day's visit, but had no concrete evidence. Instead of despairing, Johnny applied the practical knowledge he had accumulated over the years. He spent the entire day repairing the equipment, using spare parts he kept in the old barn. Thor didn't leave his side for a moment, as if standing guard against new intruders. 3 days later, while harvesting corn, Johnny found rudimentary traps scattered throughout the plantation, tensioned wires near the ground that could easily injure humans or animals passing through. He carefully removed them, keeping them as evidence. In town during the Saturday market, Johnny was selling his products as usual when a young woman of approximately 30 approached his stand. Curly hair tied in an unpretentious bun, round glasses, and an expression genuinely interested in what she saw. She chose some cheeses, and when paying, introduced herself through a note written in neat handwriting. "My name is Caroline Miller. I'm a social worker and researcher. I'm documenting traditional ways of life in rural Virginia. Could I visit your farm?" Johnny read the note several times. Something in the sincerity of those brown eyes made him trust her. He nodded and wrote back with simple but precise handwriting, "Tomorrow morning." Caroline appeared punctually the next day, driving a compact car and carrying a professional camera and a small notebook. Thor, initially suspicious, soon accepted the visitor's presence, especially after she offered him a homemade cookie she had brought. Throughout the morning, Caroline photographed Johnny's routine, caring for the animals, harvesting in the garden, the artisanal cheese-making. Using gestures and written notes, they established surprisingly effective communication. She even learned some basic sign language signs she knew to facilitate dialogue. "How long have you been living here alone?" she asked, gesturing slowly, and then writing the question. Johnny raised 10 fingers twice, 20 years. "And your family?" He pointed to the sky, then to a portrait on the wall showing his parents and grandparents in front of the same house, decades ago. "I'm sorry," said Caroline with a universal gesture of grief, "but you've created a little paradise here." That moment, Thor began barking frantically, running toward the property entrance. Caroline and Johnny followed the dog and saw 3 men walking along the dirt road, carefully observing the farm boundaries and taking notes. "Do you know those men?" asked Caroline, pointing discreetly. Johnny recognized Marcus's assistant among them. He nodded affirmatively and made a warning gesture, indicating danger. Quickly, he wrote on a paper, "They want to buy my land. They've damaged my tractor." Caroline frowned, visibly concerned. Without Johnny asking, she took several photos of the men clearly capturing their faces and the mapping action they were performing. "I'll help you," she said, writing afterward. "I can document what's happening and share your story. This might protect you." Johnny hesitated. He had never liked exposure or asking for help. His independence had always been his greatest pride. On the other hand, he felt he was facing a greater threat than he could fight alone. While considering the offer, Thor continued barking in the direction of the intruders. The men, realizing they had been noticed, quickly moved away. Caroline placed her hand on Johnny's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "We need to act before it's too late," she wrote. "Trust me." That night, after Caroline's departure, Johnny sat on the porch with Thor by his side. The stars shone intensely in the Virginia sky, so familiar and comforting. For the first time in a long time, he felt vulnerable. The farm, his sanctuary of silence and peace, now seemed threatened by forces he didn't fully understand. Thor rested his head on Johnny's knee, looking at him with those deep eyes that seemed to understand every thought. Johnny smiled, stroking the animal's soft ears. "We won't let them take our home, my friend," he murmured, feeling the vibration of his own words in his chest. "This land tells our story." The small town of Anthony's Ridge awoke agitated that Monday. In the only cafe on the central square, mainly frequented by local merchants before opening their shops, there was only one topic of conversation: the video published by Caroline Miller the night before. "Did you see that report about Johnny?" asked Mrs. Connie, the bakery owner, while serving coffee to the usual group of morning customers. "I did. I never imagined that quiet man who comes to the market had such a beautiful story," replied Mr. Joe, the retired blacksmith. On the cell phone screen being passed from hand to hand, the images showed Johnny walking around the property at sunset, with Thor by his side. The photograph was masterfully composed, with the sun creating a golden halo around the two figures. The text accompanying the images told the story of the deaf man who kept rural Virginia traditions alive, preserving a way of life that resisted unbridled modernity. Caroline had been careful not to directly mention the threats Johnny had been facing, but had included a passage about real estate interests threatening to swallow traditional small properties in the region. The photos of the men observing the property appeared discreetly at the end of the post. What no one expected, not even Caroline, was the immediate repercussion of the publication. In less than 12 hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. Emotional comments emerged from all corners of the country, extolling Johnny's silent resistance and his connection to the land. At the farm, oblivious to his sudden fame, Johnny followed his routine. That morning, he discovered new signs of invasion: fresh footprints near the barn and cut marks on the back fence. Concerned, he reinforced the fence and decided that Thor would sleep inside the house from that night on. Around noon, Caroline arrived breathless at the property. Her normally serene face showed signs of excitement and concern mixed. She clapped her hands at the gate to get attention, knowing that Johnny wouldn't hear a horn or a call. When he appeared, Caroline handed him her tablet, showing the publication and the thousands of comments and shares. Johnny read with difficulty, trying to comprehend the dimension of what was happening. The photos of him, of Thor, of his farm, now exposed to the whole world. "Your story has touched many people," explained Caroline, gesturing and then writing. "This can protect you. Important people are commenting and offering support." Johnny nodded slowly, a mixture of gratitude and apprehension in his gaze. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but he understood Caroline's strategy. Visibility meant safety. Caroline's phone rang. She answered and, after a brief conversation, turned to Johnny with a broad smile. "A TV station wants to do a report about you," she wrote, excited. "They can come tomorrow." The news left Johnny uncomfortable. He preferred his anonymity, his quiet routine. On the other hand, he knew he needed allies against the growing threat. He breathed deeply and agreed with a nod. That afternoon, while Johnny was feeding the chickens, Thor began barking furiously toward the road. A black pickup truck, the same one that had brought Marcus days before, was slowly approaching. Johnny felt a shiver run down his spine. The vehicle stopped a few yards from the gate. Marcus got out alone this time, but his posture was different, tense, aggressive. He walked to the gate and opened it unceremoniously, advancing toward Johnny with firm steps. Thor placed himself between the two, growling threateningly. Marcus stopped, clearly intimidated by the animal, but kept his gaze fixed on Johnny. He took his cell phone from his pocket and showed Caroline's publication, pointing to the photos of the men who worked for him. His face contorted in an expression of contained fury as he gesticulated violently, indicating that Johnny was causing problems. Then he pulled a paper from the inside pocket of his jacket, a new document with an even higher value written prominently. Johnny remained impassive. Calmly, he took the paper from Marcus's hands, tore it into pieces, and returned them. The message was clear. There wasn't enough money in the world to buy his story, his identity, his place. Marcus's face transformed. The veneer of civility completely disappeared, revealing an expression that mixed anger and contempt. He pointed his finger at Johnny, then at the house, then at the land around, making a sweeping gesture, an unequivocal threat. Thor advanced a step, teeth bared. Marcus instinctively backed away, but before leaving he took a photo of Johnny with his cell phone as if cataloguing an enemy. He got into the pickup truck and left, raising dust. Concerned, Johnny went to the house and wrote a message to Caroline reporting the incident. She responded immediately, "Don't leave the farm, I'm on my way there with some friends." An hour later, Caroline arrived accompanied by two men who identified themselves as journalists from a major media outlet. They explained that they wanted to move the report forward to that same afternoon, concerned about Johnny's safety after the account of the intimidating visit. The recording was simple. With Caroline's help as an interpreter, the journalists asked some basic questions about the history of the farm, the traditions maintained by Johnny, and his relationship with Thor. They filmed the property, the animals, the simple but welcoming house. At the end, one of the journalists showed something that left Johnny surprised. A quick search about New Horizon developments revealed a series of complaints about predatory practices and land grabbing in other regions. Marcus Norton had lawsuits filed against him for threats and coercion. "We'll include this information in the report," assured the journalist through Caroline's translation. "Your story is not an isolated case. There's a pattern here that needs to be exposed." When the journalists left, Caroline remained. She asked permission to spend the night at the farm, concerned about the possibility of retaliation. Johnny, grateful for the company and protection, prepared the guest room that was rarely used. Night fell over the farm, bringing with it a silence that, for Johnny, was the only one he knew. The stars shone intensely in the sky without light. Pollution and the full moon illuminated the pastures as if it were day. Caroline sat on the porch beside Johnny, both contemplating the peaceful landscape. Thor lay at their feet, vigilant even in his apparent relaxation. "You've created something special here," wrote Caroline in her notebook. "Not just a farm, but a symbol of resistance." Johnny smiled modestly and wrote back, "I just take care of what my grandfather loved. The land has memory." On the horizon, beyond the gentle hills, the lights of the town seemed distant and irrelevant. In that moment of calm, neither of them could imagine the storm that was approaching. The report about Johnny aired on the evening news the next day. The story of the deaf farmer, his special connection with the land and with Thor, and the pressures he had been facing to sell his property deeply touched viewers. Social media exploded with messages of support, transforming Johnny into a symbol of rural America's resistance against the unbridled advance of progress. The following morning, a representative from the state's Cultural Heritage Preservation Institute arrived at the farm. He was a middle-aged man with delicate gestures and a serious expression, who introduced himself as Professor August. He brought with him a folder with documents and a sign language interpreter, demonstrating a respect for Johnny's condition that other visitors had not shown. "Mr. John Baker, we are initiating a process to declare your property as an intangible cultural heritage of the state," explained the professor, with the interpreter simultaneously translating into signs. Your farm preserves traditional agricultural techniques and represents a way of life that is rapidly disappearing. Johnny attentively observed the interpreter's signs, assimilating the information with a mixture of surprise and relief. The TSU professor continued, "This process may take a few months, but once approved, your property will be protected by law against real estate speculation and predatory development." Caroline, who had remained at the farm since the previous day, couldn't contain her enthusiasm. She spontaneously hugged Johnny, a gesture that caught him by surprise, but which he returned with a shy smile. "We've gained time," she signed, having learned more basic signs. "This will slow down Marcus's plans." The professor and the interpreter spent the rest of the morning documenting the property, photographing old equipment, planting techniques, and the artisanal cheese-making. August was particularly impressed with the irrigation system developed by Johnny's grandfather, which took advantage of the natural slope of the land to distribute water throughout the plantation. When they said goodbye, the professor left a preliminary document, an official notification informing about the beginning of the heritage listing process. He recommended that Johnny keep the document in a visible place in case he received unwanted visitors. "We've also alerted the local authorities," added the professor. "The police are aware of the situation and have promised to increase patrols in the area." When the official car moved away, Caroline and Johnny exchanged looks of renewed hope. Perhaps public pressure and the interest of the authorities would be enough to drive away Marcus and his henchmen. The afternoon passed peacefully. Caroline, who worked remotely, set up her laptop on the kitchen table and continued to feed social media with updates about Johnny's situation. The hashtag #JohnnyResists was already among the most commented topics in the country. "I'll need to go back to town tomorrow," she signed to Johnny during dinner. "I have unavoidable commitments, but I'll be back in 2 days, at most." Johnny nodded, understanding. He had already abused Caroline's kindness too much. Besides, with the official notification and media attention, he felt safer. Thor, who had become fond of the visitor, rested his head on her lap, receiving distracted caresses while she typed on her cell phone. The next morning, before leaving, Caroline organized a group of neighbors and admirers who committed to visiting the farm regularly over the next few days. A kind of community surveillance scheme that would give Johnny some peace of mind. "Anything happens, send a message," she said, giving Johnny a new cell phone, configured to facilitate communication through text messages. "I'll be just a touch away." After Caroline's departure, the farm seemed strangely empty. Johnny and Thor returned to their routine, but something had changed. The tranquility once natural now seemed fragile, threatened. With each noise Thor perceived, raising his alert ears, Johnny felt a pang of apprehension. 2 days passed without incident. The visits promised by the neighbors happened, bringing not only security but also supplies, homemade gifts, and much moral support. Johnny, accustomed to solitude, now found himself at the center of a network of solidarity that deeply moved him. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, while checking the fence of the cow pasture, Johnny noticed an envelope attached to the main post. It wasn't there in the morning, which meant someone had approached the property without being noticed. With Thor at his side, always vigilant, he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping. At first, Johnny didn't understand the significance of it until his eyes caught the title of the article, "Mysterious Fire Destroys Historic Farm in Southern Virginia." The report, dated 2 years ago, talked about a traditional property that had been completely consumed by flames after the owner refused a purchase offer. Along with the clipping, a note typed in large letters, "Accidents happen every day." Chill ran down Johnny's spine. The threat was clear. He immediately took the cell phone Caroline had given him and sent a message reporting what had happened, attaching photos of the clipping and the note. Caroline's response came in minutes. "Don't stay alone, I'm coming back right now. Call the police. I'll alert the neighbors to go there immediately." Johnny followed the instructions, but a feeling of vulnerability dominated him. He decided to spend the night on watch. He checked all doors and windows, kept some lights on, and prepared for a long wait. Thor seemed to sense his anxiety, remaining alert, refusing to relax. Around 9 at night, Johnny's cell phone vibrated with a new message from Caroline. "I'm on my way. Still 2 hours of travel. Mr. Joe and his son are heading there now. Stay strong." Joe was his closest neighbor, a man respected in the community and known for his integrity. His arrival would bring some comfort. Johnny breathed deeply, trying to calm his nerves. It was at that moment that Thor began barking furiously toward the property entrance. Through the living room window, Johnny saw vehicle headlights approaching. It wasn't just one car, but 3 or 4 from what he could distinguish in the dimness. Johnny's heart accelerated. Could it be the police? Or Joe bringing reinforcements? Or were they Marcus's men coming to realize the veiled threat of the note? Thor wouldn't stop barking, running between the window and the door, as if trying to communicate something urgent to his owner. Johnny grabbed an old shotgun that had belonged to his grandfather. He had never used it, but its presence brought some security. He quickly sent another message to Caroline. "Cars arriving. Several. Don't know who it is." The headlights cut through the darkness of the Virginia night, illuminating the yard of Hope Farm with an invasive and threatening light. 3 vehicles parked in a triangular formation, blocking the main entrance. From the first car, an already familiar black pickup, Marcus Norton descended, his impeccable suit replaced by more casual and practical clothes. Behind him, 6 men of rustic appearance and hard expressions. Clearly they weren't there to negotiate. Johnny, observing through the side window, felt his stomach sink. He immediately recognized the intention of that nocturnal visit. He signaled for Thor to be quiet, stroking the animal's fur to calm him. He needed to think quickly. The group approached the house with flashlights, unhurried, like confident predators who know the prey has nowhere to run. Johnny moved away from the window and moved silently through the house, making sure all doors were really locked. The old shotgun, more a symbol of resistance than a proper weapon, weighed in his hands. A strong knock on the front door, then another. Johnny couldn't hear it, but he felt the vibrations of the blows through the wooden floor. Thor responded, with fierce barking, growling at the door as if he could, with his intimidation alone, keep the invaders away. Johnny's cell phone vibrated. Their message from Caroline. "Joe called the police. They're on their way. Hold on." But how long until they arrived? The nearest sheriff's station was almost 40 minutes away, on poorly maintained rural roads, and Marcus and his men were practically inside his house. As if reading his thoughts, the kitchen door violently shuddered. Someone was trying to break it down. Johnny ran there with Thor ahead, and leaned against the door, using his own body as an additional barrier. From the other side, he could feel the impact of strong shoulders hitting the old wood. His grandfather's house, which had withstood decades of weather, seemed fragile against this human storm. A loud crack and the door partially gave way. A strong arm managed to pass through the crack, trying to reach the inside lock. Thor didn't hesitate. He advanced, ferociously, sinking his teeth into the invading arm. A silent scream for Johnny, but which he imagined to be terrifying, filled the night. The arm withdrew quickly, causing Thor to collide with the door. Taking advantage of the moment of retreat, Johnny dragged the heavy walnut table and positioned it against the door, creating an improvised barricade, but he knew it was only a temporary solution. At that moment, he felt a boom in the living room, not by the sound, but by the vibration that ran through the entire structure of the house. The front door had completely given way. Thor ran there, barking with all his might, ready to defend his territory and his owner. Johnny followed the animal, the old shotgun in hand. In the dimly lit living room, 3 men had already entered. Marcus's unmistakable silhouette remained at the door, observing his henchmen do the dirty work. Upon seeing Thor advancing, the invaders hesitated momentarily, but soon one of them drew a weapon. Without thinking twice, Johnny raised the shotgun and fired into the air. He couldn't hear the boom, but he felt the recoil of the weapon against his shoulder, and saw the impact on the wooden ceiling. The effect was immediate. The invaders instinctively retreated, taking a few steps back. Thor took advantage of the confusion and advanced on the nearest man, knocking him to the ground with the weight of his body. The others, momentarily surprised by the coordinated reaction of man and dog, stumbled over each other trying to back away. Marcus, however, maintained his composure. Still on the threshold of the door, he made a gesture to his men, pointing to the sides of the house, clearly indicating that they should bypass the frontal problem. A siege strategy that would soon leave Johnny without options. The farmer immediately understood the plan. He retreated to the inner hallway, calling Thor with a whistle he couldn't hear, but which the dog knew well. He needed to think of a plan, to buy time until help arrived, if it would arrive in time. As he retreated to the kitchen, Johnny decided to use the only advantage he had: intimate knowledge of the house. He knew every creaking board, every door that jammed, every narrow passage where Thor could surprise an unwary invader. In his territory, even outnumbered, he still had chances. In the kitchen, he quickly searched drawers and cabinets for anything he could use as a weapon or tool. He found an old hunting knife, a powerful flashlight, and a roll of thick rope. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. Thor remained attentive at his side, ears up, muscles tense, ready to attack at the slightest signal. The bond between them, built on mutual trust and shared need, had never seemed as strong as in that moment of extreme danger. Through the kitchen window, Johnny saw shadows moving in the backyard. They were surrounding the house, exactly as he had predicted. A plan began to form in his mind, not to win that unequal battle, but to resist long enough. With quick gestures, he used the rope to firmly tie the back door, creating a complex knot that would take time to undo. Then he stacked more furniture against the entrance, forming a more robust barricade. It wouldn't prevent entry indefinitely, but every minute gained was valuable. The cell phone vibrated again. Caroline. 10 minutes. Hold on, just 10 more minutes. 10 minutes could be an eternity in a situation like that. Johnny breathed deeply, trying to calm his racing heart. He stroked Thor's head, seeking comfort in the animal's loyal presence. "We're going to protect our home, friend," he whispered, more to himself than to the dog. A strong boom at the living room window indicated that the invaders were intensifying their efforts. The sound of breaking glass was accompanied by a new wave of furious barking from Thor. Johnny signaled for the dog to remain by his side. Together they retreated to the hallway leading to the bedrooms, the last possible refuge. In the main bedroom, where his grandfather's portrait observed the scene with painted eyes that seemed as alive as they were concerned, Johnny pushed the heavy solid wood wardrobe against the door using all his strength. Thor, restless, alternated between staying by his owner's side and running to the door, as if divided between protecting Johnny and facing the invaders. Through the small bedroom window, Johnny saw distant lights on the rural road, car headlights, rapidly approaching. Could it be the police, or more of Marcus's men? Uncertainty consumed him, as the minutes dragged on with cruel slowness. A violent blow to the bedroom door made the wardrobe tremble. Another blow, and the old wood began to give way. Thor positioned himself in an attack posture, teeth bared, a deep growl forming in his throat. The bedroom door shuddered with each new blow. The old wardrobe, silent witness to generations of Johnny's family, began to give way, sliding a few inches with each impact. Thor maintained his attack position, eyes fixed on the door as if he could see through it. Johnny looked once more through the window. The headlights were rapidly approaching on the dirt road, raising a cloud of dust visible even in the darkness of the night. His mind worked frantically, calculating if help would arrive in time. From the speed, he suspected they weren't more of Marcus's men. They would have no reason to rush so much. A loud crack announced that the door lock had given way. Now, only the weight of the wardrobe prevented the invaders from entering. Thor barked incessantly, his aggressive posture showing that he would attack without hesitation as soon as he had the chance. In an instinctive gesture of protection, Johnny positioned himself between Thor and the door. He didn't want the dog to get hurt trying to defend him. After all, Thor was more than a pet. He was a loyal friend, perhaps the only true friend he had had in years of voluntary isolation. A new impact, stronger than the previous ones, made the wardrobe move almost a foot and a half. Through the open crack, Johnny saw faces contorted by effort and anger. One more blow and the invaders would be inside the bedroom. At this critical moment, Johnny made a decision. He grabbed Thor by the improvised collar he had made with a piece of rope and led him to the small bathroom attached to the bedroom. With firm gestures, he ordered the dog to stay there. Thor initially resisted, but years of coexistence had created an almost telepathic communication between them. The animal obeyed, although it maintained a low and continuous growl. Closing. The bathroom door, Johnny turned to face the invaders. He held his grandfather's old shotgun, more as a symbol of resistance than as an effective weapon. He knew that the second shot, if there was ammunition, would be the last. The wardrobe gave way completely. 3 men entered the bedroom, followed by Marcus, who remained a few steps behind like a general observing the battle from a safe distance. One of the invaders, the most corpulent, held a piece of wood that he had probably torn from some furniture in the living room. Another wielded a hunting knife, similar to the one Johnny had found in the kitchen. The third seemed unarmed, but his posture suggested training in fighting. Marcus stepped forward, his face illuminated by the weak light of the lamp. His expression mixed triumph and contempt. He pointed to Johnny and then to the window, clearly ordering his henchmen to take him outside. Johnny kept the shotgun pointed, moving it slowly between the 3 men, trying to buy time. Through the window, he saw that the headlights were already close to the property entrance. Seconds could make all the difference now. The man with the knife advanced first. Johnny fired the shotgun, but as he suspected, there wasn't a second cartridge. The blast, silent to him, must have echoed across the property, he thought. The invader hesitated for a moment, then smiled upon realizing the weapon was unloaded. Johnny threw the shotgun aside and wielded the knife he had kept in his belt. He wasn't a violent man, never had been. All his life he had dedicated himself to creating, cultivating, preserving. But at that moment, with everything he loved threatened, a fierce determination dominated him. The first man advanced with excessive confidence. Johnny, using the agility acquired in years of intense physical work, dodged the blow and managed to push the aggressor against the wall. The second took advantage of the opening and grabbed Johnny from behind, immobilizing his arms. That's when the bathroom door exploded. Thor launched himself on the man holding Johnny, sinking his teeth into his arm with enough force to elicit a scream of pain that the farmer couldn't hear but could imagine. Freed, Johnny found himself again face to face with the man with the knife. An unequal fight unfolded in the small bedroom. Thor kept one of the invaders at bay, growling threateningly each time the man tried to approach. Johnny defended himself as best he could from the other 2, using the bed and furniture as obstacles, taking advantage of his knowledge of the environment. Marcus observed everything from the door, his face a mask of calculated coldness. He consulted his watch, visibly impatient. He made an abrupt gesture to his men, as if saying, "Finish this quickly." The strongest invader managed to grab Johnny by the neck, pressing him against the wall. The farmer's vision began to blur, air lacking in his lungs. Thor, perceiving the danger, abandoned the man he was keeping at bay and launched himself against this new threat, hitting him in the back with all the weight of his body. The man stumbled forward, releasing Johnny, who fell to his knees, breathing with difficulty. Thor remained on top of the fallen aggressor, his teeth inches from his throat in a clear and mortal threat. The other 2 invaders retreated a few steps, intimidated by the animal's ferocity. Marcus, losing patience, advanced personally, pulling a gun from the inside pocket of his jacket. It was at that moment that intense lights invaded the bedroom through the window, sirens silent to Johnny, but which made Marcus and his men freeze for a crucial instant. "Police, come out with your hands up." The voice, amplified by a megaphone, didn't reach Johnny's deaf ears, but its effect on the invaders was evident. Marcus hesitated, his gaze alternating between the window and Johnny. For a moment, he seemed to consider using the gun even with the police present, but reason prevailed over hatred. With an angry gesture, he ordered his men to retreat. Johnny took advantage of the confusion to fully open the window, frantically waving to the police officers surrounding the house. Thor remained at his side, growling at the invaders who were retreating toward the door. Marcus was the last to leave the bedroom. Before doing so, he cast a look loaded with dark promises at Johnny. He didn't need words to communicate that this wasn't over. The following minutes were chaotic. Police officers entered the house through all doors and windows, weapons in hand. Thor, confused with so many strangers, placed himself protectively in front of Johnny, who needed to calm him with gentle gestures. Caroline emerged amid the chaos, running to hug Johnny as soon as she saw him. Tears ran down her face as she examined his injuries, carefully touching the bruise that was beginning to form on his neck. "It's over," she signed, her hands trembling with emotion. "You're safe now." But Johnny knew it wasn't over. Marcus and 2 of his men had escaped through the back door, as informed by the police officers through Caroline. The threat had temporarily retreated, but still hung over Hope Farm like a dark cloud. The sheriff, a middle-aged man with a grave expression, approached with Caroline, who served as interpreter. "We need your formal statement, Mr. John Baker, and we'll leave a patrol car here tonight to ensure your safety." While answering the sheriff's questions, Johnny observed his house. The living room was destroyed, furniture broken, family mementos scattered on the floor. His grandfather's portrait lay fallen, the glass of the frame shattered. A wave of sadness invaded him, but was quickly replaced by determination. This was his land, his home, his story, and he would defend it to his last breath. Caroline, perceiving his expression, placed her hand on his shoulder. "We'll rebuild everything," she signed. "And now you're not alone anymore." Thor approached. His fur still bristled, but his eyes calmer, and rested his head on Johnny's knee. The farmer smiled, stroking the ears of the animal that had risked itself to protect him. Dawn brought a new day to Hope Farm. The golden light of the Virginia sun filtered through the broken windows, illuminating the damage from the previous night. Johnny, who had barely managed to sleep, observed the scene with a mixture of sadness and determination. Thor remained at his side, still alert, as if expecting the invaders might return at any moment. The police car was still parked near the main gate, 2 officers taking turns in surveillance. Caroline had insisted on staying too, sleeping on the living room sofa after helping to organize the minimum possible so that Johnny could rest. "Coffee?" she offered upon finding him on the porch, signaling with her hands the gesture of drinking from a cup. Johnny nodded, grateful. The strong aroma of freshly brewed coffee brought a comforting sensation of normality amid the chaos. They sat side by side on the porch steps, observing the sunrise in contemplative silence. It was Caroline who broke the silence after a few minutes. "The sheriff called," she signed. "They haven't been able to capture Marcus yet, but they've issued an arrest warrant. He won't be able to come near here." Johnny made a gesture of skepticism. He knew that papers and official orders meant little to a man like Marcus Norton. Caroline seemed to read his thoughts. "I also have other news," she continued, her face lighting up with a small smile. The process of listing the farm as a cultural heritage site was accelerated after the incident. Professor August mobilized his contacts at the Institute. That was genuinely good news. Official recognition would bring an additional layer of legal protection for the property. But Johnny knew that the physical reconstruction of the farm was equally urgent. The doors needed to be fixed, windows replaced, furniture repaired, and there was still the daily work with the animals and the plantation, which couldn't wait. As if answering an invisible call, a car appeared on the dirt road, followed by another and another. Soon, a small caravan of vehicles was approaching the farm. Johnny stood up, intrigued and a little apprehensive. Thor was on alert, but without showing aggression. The first car stopped near the porch, and from it descended Mr. Joe, the neighbor who had tried to arrive the night before. Behind him came other residents of the region, some that Johnny knew from the market, others he had never seen before. All carried tools, wood, building materials. "We came to help rebuild, Johnny," said Joe through the signs that Caroline translated. "Nobody messes with one of our own like that." Johnny felt a lump in his throat. In all his years of voluntary isolation, he had never imagined that the community around him considered him one of their own. He had always seen himself as a loner, a man on the margin, living in his own silent world. Now confronted with that demonstration of solidarity, something broke inside him. An invisible wall he had built around his heart after the departure of his last family members. The volunteers organized themselves quickly. Some began to fix the broken-down doors. Others replaced the broken glass in the windows. A group led by Mrs. Connie dedicated themselves to cleaning up the shards and restoring order inside the house. Thor observed everything with curiosity, occasionally sniffing the hands extended to him, accepting caresses from strangers for the first time. Caroline, while helping coordinate the work, didn't stop updating her social media. The images of destruction, followed by those of community reconstruction, caused a strong impact. Messages of support arrived from all over the country, some accompanied by offers of financial help for the recovery of the farm. "People want to contribute," she explained to Johnny. "Can I create an online fundraiser to help with the costs?" Johnny hesitated. His pride had always made him reject external help, but circumstances had changed. It wasn't just about his subsistence now, but about preserving a cultural heritage, a way of life that belonged not only to him, but to a collective memory. Finally, he agreed with a nod. At noon, when the sun was at its zenith, the volunteers took a break for lunch. Mrs. Connie had brought large pots of homemade food, pork, and beans, rice, sautéed collard greens, pot roast with potatoes. The table was set in the yard, under the shade of an old mango tree, and everyone gathered for the community meal. Johnny observed the scene with a strange sensation. His farm, for so long a solitary refuge, now pulsated with life and voices that he couldn't hear, but whose vibrations he felt in the air, in the ground, in the walls of the old house. Thor, completely at ease with the visitors, circulated among the improvised tables, receiving pats and pieces of meat discreetly offered. Caroline sat beside Johnny, serving him a generous plate. "You've created a revolution without meaning to," she signed, pointing to the movement around. People were waiting for something like this, a symbol of resistance against the unbridled advance of so-called progress. Johnny shook his head, uncomfortable with the idea of being a symbol of anything. He had always seen himself as just a simple man, taking care of the land he loved. Caroline smiled, understanding his discomfort. "Sometimes the most powerful stories are those that don't try to be stories," she continued. "You just lived according to your values, without concessions. That inspires people in a world where everything seems negotiable." The afternoon brought significant advances in reconstruction. The main doors were already fixed, stronger than before. The windows had new glass, and most of the damaged furniture had been repaired or replaced. Johnny's grandfather's portrait had received a new frame, more beautiful than the previous one. Around 4 o'clock, an official car from the Cultural Heritage Institute parked near the house. Professor August descended, accompanied by 2 assistants and a photographer. He brought with him a framed document, the preliminary certificate, of Hope Farm's listing as an intangible cultural heritage of the state of Virginia. The improvised ceremony of delivering the document was recorded by Caroline and the official photographer. Johnny, visibly moved, accepted the certificate with slightly trembling hands. Thor, as if understanding the importance of the moment, positioned himself solemnly beside his owner, his posture erect, almost proud. "Now it's official," translated Caroline as the professor spoke. "The farm is protected by law. Any attempt to damage it or pressure its sale will be considered a crime against cultural heritage." The volunteers applauded the news, some with tears in their eyes. It was a victory not only for Johnny, but for all who valued the traditions and way of life he represented. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange and red, most of the volunteers prepared to leave. The farm had been transformed in a single day of collective work. Not only had the physical damage been repaired, but something more important had been restored: Johnny's connection with the community around him. Caroline, who planned to stay another night, showed Johnny the result of the online fundraiser. In less than 24 hours, thousands of people had contributed, raising an amount that would easily cover all material costs and still leave some for security investments and property improvements. "What do you think about installing security cameras?" she suggested. "And maybe an alarm system connected directly to the sheriff's station." Johnny nodded, recognizing the wisdom of the suggestion. The world had invaded his bubble of isolation, for better or worse. He needed to adapt to this new reality. When the last of the cars moved away, Leaving only the police car and Caroline's vehicle, Johnny and Thor walked to the highest point of the property, a small hill from where one could see the entire extent of Hope Farm. The setting sun bathed the red earth, the verdant pastures, and the restored house in a golden light that seemed almost magical. 3 months passed since the night of the confrontation. Hope Farm, once an almost forgotten place on the map, had transformed into a cultural reference point in the region. The heritage listing process had been successfully completed, and an official plaque from the Cultural Heritage Institute now adorned the property entrance. Johnny's life had changed in ways he never imagined. The solitary routine had given way to an existence connected with the community and, surprisingly, with the world beyond the Virginia mountains. Every Saturday, groups of visitors came to experience the farm, now transformed into a living center for preserving traditional agricultural techniques. Caroline, who had initially planned to stay just a few days, had extended her stay. She had rented a small house in town 20 minutes away and divided her time between her work as a social worker and the ongoing documentation of Hope Farm. Between her and Johnny, a special relationship had developed based on mutual respect and growing admiration. That autumn afternoon, while Johnny was teaching a group of college students how to make artisanal cheese, Thor, now completely recovered and stronger than ever, kept vigilant by his side. The dog had become a local celebrity, almost as famous as his owner. Children from the region came especially to pet him and hear, retold by their parents, the story of how he had bravely defended the farm. My grandfather's technique consists of keeping the milk at the exact temperature, Johnny explained in sign language, with Caroline translating for the visitors. Not 1 degree more, not 1 less. The students observed the process, fascinated, some taking notes, others filming with their cell phones. Among them, a young man of approximately 20 caught Johnny's attention. There was something familiar about his face, in the way he slightly tilted his head to the side while paying attention. When the workshop ended and the visitors began to disperse, the young man approached, visibly nervous. "My name is Michael," he said, with Caroline translating. "Michael Norton." Johnny stiffened upon hearing the surname. Thor, sensing his owner's tension, was immediately alert. Caroline instinctively positioned herself closer to Johnny, as if ready to protect him. "I'm Marcus Norton's son," continued the young man, eyes downcast, hands trembling slightly. "I came to apologize for what my father tried to do, and to bring some information that I think you should have." Johnny observed the young man for a few moments. There was no trace of Marcus's arrogance or cruelty in that young face. On the contrary, he saw sincerity and deep sadness in his eyes. With a calm gesture, he indicated that he should continue. Michael opened his backpack and removed a folder with documents. "My father is a fugitive, as you must know. The police have been looking for him since the incident, but he managed to escape to Canada. Before going, however, I discovered his real plans for this land." He opened the documents on the kitchen table. They were detailed plans for a large real estate development, a luxury condominium with dozens of houses, a golf club and a 5-star hotel, all designed to extend over what is now Hope Farm and neighboring properties. "He had already bought the surrounding lands," explained Michael. "Your farm was the last piece necessary to complete the project, but that wasn't all." The young man took out another document from the folder, a detailed geological report indicating the existence of a large reserve of pure mineral water under the farm's lands, an increasingly valuable treasure in times of water scarcity. "That was the real reason for his interest," continued Michael. "The water. He planned to bottle it and sell it as premium water to international markets. The condominium was just a facade to gain access to water rights." Caroline translated each word, observing Johnny's expression gradually change from surprise to understanding. Thor, realizing that the young man posed no threat, had relaxed and now rested near the wood stove, although his attentive eyes never left the visitor. "Why are you telling me this?" asked Johnny through Caroline. Michael sighed deeply, as if gathering courage. "Because I'm tired of the lies and destruction my father leaves wherever he goes. I grew up watching him manipulate people, corrupt public officials, and threaten those who opposed his plans. I believe that what you've done here protecting this place is important, not just for you, but for all of us." Caroline and Johnny exchanged significant looks. Michael's revelation changed everything. What seemed to be just real estate greed was, in fact, a much larger plot involving essential natural resources. "There's one more thing you should know," continued Michael, taking a final document from the folder. "My father hasn't completely given up. Even from Canada, he's still moving his connections to try to nullify the farm's heritage listing. These are emails between him and some state government officials. He's offering bribes for them to find technical flaws in the process." Johnny studied the documents with a grave expression. After a few minutes, he stood up and walked to the porch, followed by Caroline and Michael. He pointed to the land, stretching before them. The verdant pastures, the organic garden, the small grove of native trees he had carefully preserved over the years. Then he pointed to the sky, to his grandfather's portrait on the wall, and finally to his own heart. Caroline immediately understood what he wanted to express. "He says this land is not just a piece of ground," she translated. "It's a living history, a memory, an identity. The water that runs underneath it doesn't belong to anyone specifically, but to everyone. And he will fight to keep it that way." Michael nodded, moved. "I want to help," said the young man. "I can testify against my father, confirm his real intentions and the methods he would use to achieve them. I know it's asking a lot, considering who I am, but I'd like to stay nearby, learn more about this place, about what you're building. Here." Johnny looked at Thor as if consulting the dog. The animal, as if perfectly understanding the moment, approached Michael and sniffed his extended hand. Then, to everyone's surprise, he sat down beside the young man in a clear demonstration of acceptance. A slow smile formed on Johnny's face. He extended his hand to Michael, who shook it with visible gratitude. 6 months later, Hope Farm had completely transformed. What was once an isolated place had become a vibrant center for environmental education and cultural preservation. With Michael's legal support, who knew his father's tricks, all attempts to nullify the property's heritage listing were frustrated. The scandal involving the revealed emails resulted in the dismissal of several corrupt officials and further strengthened the farm's legal protection. Caroline, now a constant presence in Johnny's life, coordinated the educational program that received students from all over the country. Her relationship with the farmer had evolved into something deeper than friendship, a growing love, built on mutual respect and admiration. She had become fluent in sign language, and they now conversed with an intimacy and fluency that enchanted all who observed them. Michael had found on the farm something he never had in the luxurious mansion where he grew up, a sense of purpose and belonging. He worked daily alongside Johnny, learning traditional techniques of cultivation and animal husbandry, absorbing ancestral knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Thor, now a mature and even more imposing dog, continued to be the faithful guardian of the property. But his temperament had softened with time and security. He allowed himself to play with visiting children and even accepted caresses from strangers, although he always kept a vigilant eye on his beloved owner. That spring afternoon, as the sun slowly set behind the mountains, Johnny, Caroline, Michael and Thor walked together across the property. They stopped at the same high point from where months before Johnny had contemplated his restored farm alone after the attack. "The Institute approved our proposal for the research center," Caroline signed, her gestures flowing naturally. "Hope Farm will officially be a hub for studies on sustainability and preservation of water resources." Michael smiled, still amazed at the irony of fate. The water his father had wanted to exploit commercially would now be protected and studied for everyone's benefit. Johnny observed the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. In his heart, he felt his grandfather's presence, as if the old farmer could see what his beloved farm had become. What had begun as a struggle for survival had transformed into something much greater, a movement, a cause, a legacy. Thor sat beside him, his golden fur gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. Johnny stroked the animal's head, remembering that first morning when he found him abandoned, injured, discarded as if he had no value. How much they both had changed since then, how much they had grown together. Caroline approached, intertwining her fingers with his. Michael joined the group, bringing with him a small yellow oak sapling that they planned to plant together as a symbol of renewal and hope. "Did you know that oak roots can reach surprising depths to search for water?" asked Michael, as Caroline translated. "They go beyond the surface, connecting with what we cannot see, but which sustains everything." Johnny smiled, appreciating the metaphor. His own life had been like that, apparently isolated on the surface but deeply connected with the land, with memory, with the traditions that kept him firm even in the most difficult moments. The spot chosen for planting was close to the house, where the oak could be seen from all windows when it grew and blossomed. With careful gestures, Johnny removed the small tree from the pot and placed it in the hole that Michael had prepared. Caroline and the young man helped cover the roots with fertile soil, while Thor observed with curiosity. When they finished, the four remained in contemplative silence, observing the small sapling that would one day become a majestic tree, its yellow flowers illuminating the landscape like natural fireworks. In that moment, under the starry Virginia sky, Johnny understood a simple but profound truth. Silence had never meant solitude. He was, and had always been, connected, with the land he cultivated, with the animals he cared for, with the people who now shared his life. In his world without sounds, he had found a richness of meanings that transcended words. Thor, as if sensing his owner's thoughts, leaned against his leg, offering his warmth and constant companionship. Caroline smiled at Johnny, her eyes reflecting the first stars of the night. Michael, standing beside the newly planted sapling, represented the future, the continuity of the work, the preservation of traditions, the renewal of hope. Hope Farm, once a solitary refuge, had transformed into a beacon of resistance and renewal. And Johnny, the silent guardian, had finally found his voice, not in spoken words, but in actions that echoed far beyond the Virginia mountains. The news report about Johnny aired on the evening news the following week. The story of the deaf farmer, his special connection with the land and with Thor, and the revelations about Marcus Norton's nefarious plans deeply touched viewers across the nation. Social media exploded with messages of support, transforming Johnny's struggle into a symbol of resistance against corporate greed and environmental exploitation. Environmental organizations reached out, offering resources and expertise to help study and protect the underground water reservoir. Legal experts volunteered their services to strengthen the farm's protection against any future threats. What had begun as one man's fight to preserve his home had become a rallying point for those concerned about the preservation of natural resources and traditional ways of life. One evening, as Johnny and Caroline sat on the porch watching a magnificent sunset, a sleek black car pulled up to the farm. A distinguished older gentleman stepped out, accompanied by a younger woman who introduced herself as a sign language interpreter. "My name is Senator William Thompson," the man said through the interpreter. "I've been following your story with great interest. What you've done here has implications that go far beyond this property." Inside, over a simple dinner of farm-fresh food, the senator explained that he was sponsoring new legislation to protect family farms and water resources throughout the state. He wanted Hope Farm to be a model for the initiative. "This place represents everything we need to preserve," the senator continued. "Sustainable agriculture, traditional knowledge, pure water sources. Your stand against Marcus Norton has opened many eyes in Washington." Johnny listened attentively, amazed that his simple desire to protect his home had resonated so widely. When asked if he would consider allowing Hope Farm to be featured in congressional hearings about land and water protection, he agreed without hesitation. If his story could help protect other farms and communities, how could he refuse? As the months passed, Hope Farm continued to evolve. The research center broke ground, a modern but architecturally harmonious building that would house scientists studying sustainable agriculture and water conservation. Michael, who had discovered a passion for environmental law, had begun law school with the intention of specializing in property rights and conservation. Thor, now undisputedly the most famous dog in the county, had his own Instagram account, managed by Caroline, which shared daily moments of farm life and had unexpectedly become a powerful educational tool. Children from all over the country followed the adventures of Thor the Guardian, and through him learned about sustainable farming, environmental protection, and the importance of preserving traditional knowledge. One crisp October morning, as Johnny was showing a group of elementary school children how to milk a cow, Thor suddenly perked up, his posture alert but not aggressive. Following the dog's gaze, Johnny noticed a police car coming up the driveway, followed by another official-looking vehicle. The sheriff stepped out first, nodding respectfully to Johnny. From the second car emerged a federal marshal and two other officers. Caroline quickly joined Johnny, concern evident in her expression. "Mr. Baker," the sheriff said, with Caroline translating, "we have news you should hear. Marcus Norton was apprehended yesterday attempting to re-enter the United States through Michigan. He's in federal custody now." Johnny felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The constant, subtle fear that Marcus might return to threaten his home again had been an unwelcome companion these past months. "There's more," the federal marshal added. "Based on the evidence provided by Michael Norton and the emails he shared, we've been able to uncover a larger network of corruption involving several state officials and real estate developers. This goes beyond just your farm. It's a pattern that has been repeated across multiple states." The implications were significant. What had begun as one man's stand against a powerful adversary had unraveled a web of corruption that had been operating unchecked for years. Johnny's simple refusal to sell had started a chain reaction that was now bringing justice to many communities that had suffered similar pressures. That evening, as news of Marcus's arrest spread, spontaneous visitors began arriving at the farm. Neighbors, friends, supporters from nearby towns, even strangers who had followed the story online. They brought food, drinks, and musical instruments. A celebration emerged, organic and joyful, under the autumn stars. As fiddles played and people danced on the grass, Johnny stood slightly apart, taking in the scene with wonder. Thor sat beside him, as always, a steadfast companion. Caroline approached, her face glowing in the light of the improvised lanterns. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she signed, her eyes bright with emotion. "You didn't just save the farm. You created something new here, a community, a movement." Johnny nodded, thinking of the portrait that still hung in the living room, the silent witness to all that had transpired. He hadn't set out to be a hero, or to start a movement. He had simply stood firm for what he believed in, for the land that told his story and carried his memories. Michael joined them, a glass of local cider in his hand. "I just got word from my contact at the EPA," he said, excitement evident in his rapid signing. "They've classified the water reservoir under the farm as a protected resource. No one can drill or extract from it without federal approval now." This was perhaps the greatest victory of all, ensuring that the pure water would remain protected not just during Johnny's lifetime, but for generations to come. As the celebration continued around them, Johnny took Caroline's hand and led her away from the crowd, up the small hill where they had planted the oak sapling. In the 6 months since planting, it had already grown significantly, its young branches reaching confidently toward the sky. Under the stars, with Thor watching attentively nearby, Johnny knelt and took something from his pocket, a small, simple ring crafted from silver that had belonged to his grandmother. He had no words, not even signed ones, but his question was clear in his eyes as he held it out to Caroline. Her answer was equally wordless but unmistakable. As she extended her hand, tears of joy streaming down her face, Johnny slipped the ring onto her finger. Their kiss, beneath the Virginia stars with Thor circling them excitedly, sealed a promise as enduring as the land itself. In the years that followed, Hope Farm thrived as never before. Johnny and Caroline married in a simple ceremony under the spreading branches of an old oak tree, with Thor as the honorary best man. Michael completed his law degree and established a practice specializing in environmental and property rights, helping other small farmers stand against corporate interests. The research center became internationally recognized for its work on sustainable agriculture and water conservation. Delegations from around the world visited to learn from the model established at Hope Farm. Each visitor left with a deeper, understanding of the delicate balance between progress and preservation, between growth and sustainability. But perhaps the most profound change was in Johnny himself. The man who had lived for decades in self-imposed isolation now found himself at the center of a vibrant community. His silence, once a barrier, had become almost irrelevant as more people in the community learned sign language to communicate with him directly. One particularly meaningful moment came when the local school board voted to make sign language classes available to all students in the county, citing the Johnny Baker effect on community inclusivity. Children who might never have learned to sign were now fluent, creating a more connected and accessible world for all deaf individuals in the region. Thor, getting older but still majestic, remained Johnny's constant companion, though he now shared his guardian duties with two younger German shepherds that Caroline had rescued and trained. The Thor's Guardians program, which trained abandoned dogs to work on farms, had become another unexpected offshoot of Johnny's story. On the 10th anniversary of the night Johnny had found Thor abandoned by the fence, a special celebration was held at the farm. Hundreds of people gathered to honor not just the remarkable bond between a man and his dog, but the ripple effects their story had created throughout the community and beyond. As Johnny stood before the crowd with Caroline interpreting his signs, he expressed a simple truth that had guided him through all the years. "I never set out to change anything beyond my fence line. I just wanted to honor my grandfather's legacy, to care for this land as he taught me. But what I've learned is that none of us is truly isolated. Every stand we take, every value we uphold, sends ripples far beyond what we can see. This farm isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to all of us who believe in protecting what matters." Thor, grey around the muzzle now but still dignified, sat proudly at Johnny's feet as applause swept through the crowd. The once abandoned puppy and the deaf farmer had not only found each other, they had created a legacy of hope that would endure for generations. As twilight descended over Hope Farm, with fireflies beginning their nightly dance across the fields, Johnny looked out over all they had accomplished. From the research center to the educational programs, from the protected water reservoir to the community that had grown around them, it was more than he could ever have imagined on that fateful morning when he found a trembling puppy by the fence. In his world of silence, Johnny had found the most powerful voice of all, the voice of unwavering commitment to what he believed in, and in doing so, he had helped others find their voices too. The oak sapling, now a young but sturdy tree, stood as a living testament to what can grow from the smallest beginnings when nurtured with care and defended with courage. Like Hope Farm itself, it had put down roots that would last for generations, a legacy of resistance, renewal, and above all, hope.